This morning, we're going to meet somebody who probably elicits a lot of raised eyebrows. When we think of Batsheva, the Batsheva that we are familiar with is the Batsheva who's up there on the rooftop. I'd like to introduce you to this very same Batsheva today, but the point that I'm going to start is not Batsheva on the rooftop bathing, but rather a very, very different aspect of Batsheva. And of course, as always, our starting point is the pasuk in the Eshet Chayil, which is parallel to Batsheva. Source number 1, Marvadim astala shesh ve'argaman levusha. She makes covers, marvadim, she makes covers. What kind of covers? Bed covers, bedspreads. She makes covers for herself, and she is dressed in shesh ve'argaman. She's dressed in fine linen and in purple. In this pasuk of the Eshet Chayil, Shlomo HaMelech takes us to the bedroom of the Eshet Chayil. Here she is with her covers, dressed in purple, dressed in linen. What is this woman dressing in purple and in linen for? What's the purple and the linen? And what are with these bed covers? Why am I being taken to this particular area of the house? Purple and linen is the fabric and is the color of royalty. And in fact, the Midrash tells us in source number 2, the reason this pasuk is a reference to Batsheva, Marvadim astala zu Batsheva, the one who makes bedspreads, the one who has linen and purple as her symbol is Batsheva. Why? Sheyatsa mimena Shlomo. Because Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, came from her. She was King Solomon's mother. Shehaya merukam b'shesh ve'argaman, and King Solomon was the one who was bedecked in purple and in linen, because that is the royal color, malach misof ha'olam ve'ad sofo, and he ruled from one end of the world to the other. This Batsheva, who what I'm familiar with again is the story of Batsheva on the rooftop, becomes the mother of Shlomo HaMelech. What was her greatness? What was her moment of glory? What was so special about her that she deserves a pasuk in the Eshet Chayil? She deserves a pasuk in the Eshet Chayil. Let's take a look. The Batsheva that I'd like to introduce to you to is, before we look at her as Batsheva, King David's wife, I'd like to introduce her to you as Batsheva, the mother. Because in fact, that is how the Midrash addresses her, Batsheva, the mother. So let's take a look, and I'm going to ask you to scroll ahead to a particular moment, a very momentous event in Jewish history, namely the grand opening of the first temple, of the first Beit HaMikdash. I'm going to ask you to scroll ahead, right, a few decades, to this momentous day, which on the Jewish calendar we had been waiting for centuries and millennia, the day when finally the first temple is built, and it is the grand opening of the Beit HaMikdash. All hearts are pounding, nobody's falling asleep that night, everybody's excited. Finally, the moment when the Beit HaMikdash is built in Yerushalayim and is a grand opening. Now, I must tell you that although a lot of people couldn't fall asleep that night, there's one person who that night, the night before the grand opening, slept very well. Who is it? Is the builder of the Beit HaMikdash himself, is Shlomo HaMelech. He slept very well that night. The reason being, take a look with me at source number 4. I'll come back to 3 in a moment. Source number 4, second line. Amar Rab Levi, Oto hayom nitkarev tamid ba'arba sha'ot. The day of the grand opening of the Beit HaMikdash, the sacrifices were bought late. They were not bought on time. They were bought hours later than they were supposed to have brought. What? Grand opening of the Beit HaMikdash? And the korbanot are brought late? Why? V'hayu Yisrael atzuvim. And the Jewish people were so sad that the grand opening of the Holy Temple, and there's a delay and everything is late. Shehaya yom chanukat Beit HaMikdash. It was the grand opening of the temple. V'lo hayu yocholim la'asot. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't go ahead with the grand opening. Mipnei shehaya Shlomo yoshin. Because King Solomon was fast asleep. And King Solomon, who was the one who built the temple, was supposed to be the one to perform the grand opening. And he was fast asleep. Now, why was he fast asleep? Because he got married the night before. And we'll come to that in a moment. We'll talk about the wedding soon. Now, when the king is fast asleep, who's going to go knocking at his door? Not his advisors, because who's going to wake up the king? It's the morning after his wedding. Right? Everybody's terrified. V'hayu, last line in source 4, v'hayu mityarim l'hakitzo. They were terrified to wake him up. Mipnei mata malchut. Because they were scared. He is the king. What, you going to wake up the king? The morning after his wedding? Well, who is this a job for? When nobody can wake up the king, not his advisors, not his vice president, not anybody. This is job that calls for mommy, right? When there's something that nobody else can handle, mommy can always handle. Halchu v'hodiyu leBatsheva. So they went and they told Batsheva. V'alcha hi v'hakitzato. And Batsheva went and she woke him up. Now this moment as to how Batsheva wakes up her son, who is king of Israel. Mind you, he is the most glorious king that's ever going to reign over the Jewish people. This moment as to how she wakes him up, I want to study. I'll show it to you in a second. First, I want to show you something about his wedding night. Source number 3. I told you that the night before Shlomo, the grand opening of the Beit HaMikdash, Shlomo HaMelech gets married. Now, he doesn't get married to a nice, good Jewish girl. He gets married to who? To Bat Paro, to the daughter of Paro, no less. The daughter of the emperor of the nation which represents the greatest decadence in the world. Now, sure, he converted her, although there was lots of talk about this. But the night before the grand opening of the Beit HaMikdash was the grand wedding of Shlomo HaMelech and the daughter of Paro. Now, why he married her is a separate talk on its own, which we're not going to get in today, but suffice it to say that his intentions were incredibly, incredibly lofty. He had the greatest intentions in mind. He wanted to go to the lowest of the low and redeem from there the spark of holiness that is stuck in Egypt, and thereby bring the whole world under the umbrella of God, although that's a talk for a different time. And this Bat Paro, this daughter of Paro, what did she do? Source number 3, Amar Rab Levi, Ma'asta Bat Paro, Natla Sadin. She took this sheet of sorts, V'kav'a ba kol minei kochavim u'mazalot, and she affixed all these different stars and planets. You know, today they have these glow-in-the-dark stickers, and you stick them on your kid's bedroom ceiling. So I guess it was the ancient equivalent of that. U'pirsa oto lemala mimitato. And she spread this over the top, canopy portion over their bed. V'kol zman shehaya rotze Shlomo la'amod. And in the morning, when Shlomo HaMelech wanted to get up, ra'ah ha'kochavim, he saw these, whatever they were, glow-in-the-dark type stars, and he said, hayashen. And he said, okay, stars. I guess it's still time to sleep. Ad arba sha'ot. And this was already 4 hours late. Ube'oto yom nitkarev tamid shel shachar bedalet sha'ot. So that morning, the sacrifices, which again, grand opening of the Beit HaMikdash, were brought hours and hours late. Now nobody's going to wake up the king. Mommy's going to do it. If I was Batsheva, me, Batsheva, mother of the king, you know what I would do? I'll tell you what I would do. If I was Batsheva, first of all, I would go to bagel country, and I would order a large breakfast platter with my son's favorite delicacies, and this bagel and that bagel and this omelet, and with mushrooms and peppers, and I would tell them to make something fancy, something special, not on plastic, on silver, if I was Batsheva. Then after bagel country, I would go to Jewel, and I would buy the fanciest helium balloons of purple and of this and of Mazal Tov and congratulations and whatever else I could find. And with this platter and with these balloons, right, I would make a whole parade by myself, right, morning after his wedding, and I would very, very gently, knock on his door. Darling, Shlomo, Melech, he's a king, he just got married, cut him some slack. Okay, Beit HaMikdash, pseder, you know, this is a big achievement, Chatuna, right, this is a Sheva brachot, right, let him have some breakfast, a little bit food in his tummy, probably he didn't eat too much at the wedding last night. I would put the balloon somewhere, straighten up the place a little bit maybe. This is my son, I'm so proud of him. That's what I would do if I was Batsheva. Not this Batsheva. Take a look at what she does. Unbelievable. Source number 5. Unbelievable. She walks in there, and she says to him, Berei, Oh, my son. Uh-oh. I guess she skipped the balloons. Harbe nashim nasa avicha. You know something? Your father had a lot of wives. P.S. 18 in fact. וכיוון שבא נתן הנביא ואמר לו, והנה בן נולד לך כי שלמה יהיה שמו. And you know, my son, one day a prophet, Natan Hanavi, came to your father David. And he told David, my husband, that one of his wives is going to have a kid, and the kid's name is going to be Shlomo. So you know what each one of the wives did, including me. הייתה כל אחד אומרת, אם מעמדת אני שלמה, אני מקריבה כל הקורבנות שבתורה. If I am lucky enough to bear this child to King David, I'm going to bring all the sacrifices in the Torah. I make a vow, and I'm going to make all the sacrifices to God if I am lucky enough to be the mother. ועכשיו עמדתי. Now here I am. I was chosen to be that mother, to give birth to the heir, to give birth to the one who's going to take after David. וקורבנותי בידי. I got my sacrifices already. ואתה ישן? And you sleeping? Bagel country? No, lack, something, nothing for breakfast? That's not all. Look at what she does. Source number 6. Unbelievable. Source 6, end of the first line. מלמד שכפאתו עמו על העמוד. She took him. Literally this means she tied him to a pole. Maybe with those strings from the helium balloons, I don't know. There's another source which says, v'natla sandala, she took her sandal and she slapped him on both sides. Wow. What happened morning after his wedding? She tied him to a pole, figuratively, literally, and she took her sandal and did what she did. V'amralo, and she said, ma bari u'ma bar bitni u'ma bar nedarai. Woe, my son, woe, the child of my womb, and woe, the child of my vows. Let's take a look at what she meant for each one. Ma bari, woe, my son. Oh, my son. She's not only your son, she's also King David's son. No. My son. Hakol yodim she'avicha yirei shamayim haya. You know, everybody knows that your dad was the most God-fearing person. Achshav yomru, imo garma lo. Now they're going to look at you and they're going to say, oh, he took after his mother. Look at him. Maybe he had a little too much to drink. He took after his mother. That's how they're going to talk. So she calls him my son. They're going to look at you and they're going to call you my son. They're going to think that you didn't take after your father, you took after me. Then look at what she says. Uma bar bitni, you child of my womb. The intention, says the Gemara, is while you were still in my womb, I took care to make sure that when you would come out of my womb, you would be the type of child who could really use his potential to the fullest. Look at what she says. Kol hanashim shel beit avicha. Now remember, King Solomon is like tied to a pole. His mother just smacked him with a shoe. No bagel country platter, no helium balloons. Kol hanashim shel beit avicha. Kevan shemitabrot, shuv einan ro'ot pnei hamelech. All the other women that your father married, remember there were 18 altogether, when they got pregnant, when they conceived from David, they would not be with him. They would not be with him anymore. They would not be intimate with him anymore until after the baby was born. In other words, once they got what they wanted, right? They conceived from the king, they conceived from David. They would not go to be intimate with King David. But I'll tell you a little secret. Dachakti v'nichnasti, but I pushed myself in, which is not like the ways of any other woman who conceives from the king. I pushed my way in and I requested to be intimate with King David. Why? Based on Rashi in the Gemara in Masechet Nida, apparently, when a man is intimate with his wife during her third trimester, it has a positive effect on the child. What is the effect? She says, Kedei sheyeh li ben mezuraz umeluban. I wanted to have a child who will be robust and who would be good looking. I wanted a kid who was going to be strong and who was going to be good looking. Why? For the purpose of what? So you should be able to use these talents, you should be able to use these traits to serve God better, not to indulge in worldly pleasures. And now what? Look at this. You took all your strength and you're doing things with it that I'm not so pleased about. And I know you have good intentions. But look at this, and this is the final clincher. This is my favorite thing she throws at him. It's not a shoe. Uma bar nedarai, you son of my vows. This is italicized source number 6. Kol nashim shel beit avicha Hayu nodrot. You know, all the other women that your father David married, they used to take a vow. This was customary of the women that David HaMelech used to marry. They would all take a vow. And the vow would be, Yeli ben hagun lemalchut. I take a vow that Hashem, if you give me a son who is fit for the throne, who is fit to be a king, I will do X, Y, and Z for you. I will donate gold to the temple. I will bring sacrifices. I will, whatever it was that they would make a vow to give charity or to do all kinds of other things. And what was the vow? Give me a son who is fit for the throne. Ve'ani nadarti. But you know what I vowed? I didn't vow like all the other women. My vow was different. I didn't pray to God that he should give me a child fit for the throne. Amarti, Hiyeli ben zariz umemule beTorah. I prayed, please God, give me a child who will be full of Torah. Vehagun leneviut. And a child who is worthy to become a prophet. What's the difference? King, prophet, what's the difference? A big difference. A king is a king. A prophet. To be a prophet, what's the main ingredient? What's the main quality, the character that is required to become a prophet? Namely, to be God-fearing. I wanted a child who was going to fear God. That's what I prayed for. Shlomo, you think I care? I'm skipping to the next line where it's italicized. Amralo, malachat sel melachim. Well, you became a king suddenly? You think I care about your crown? Oh my gosh, what kind of a Jewish mother are you? You think I care about your linen and your purple and your royal robes? Your crown matters to me? Your kingship matters to me? Sheshotim yain. You know what kings do? They get drunk. This is what I davened for. This is what I prayed for my child to be a king. Why? So you can get drunk? I don't need this. Mishtakrim, v'omrim lama lanuel, and then they go saying they go all godless. This is not what I davened for. This is not what I prayed for. I wanted you to be God-fearing. You think I care about your crown? Unbelievable. What a Jewish mother. What a brilliant Jewish mother. The morning after his wedding, grand opening of the Beit HaMikdash. What do you got to ruin his mood for? No, she puts him in his place. She puts him where he belongs because this is a woman who has her priorities straight. Right? The cliche is always that every good Jewish mother wants her child to be, something fancy, Harvard graduate, doctor, lawyer, right? And these are the things that we are so proud of. For Batsheva, her response is not, honey, mazel tov, right? You became a doctor now. Hurry, go to your first patient. You missed davening for your first patient? You missed davening? This is what I raised you for? You missed tefillah? To go to your first patient? So what, you have an MD? So what, you have a PhD? You didn't go to pray. This is what I prayed for? Where's your fear of God? I wanted you to be a prophet. Okay, very nice. You're a king. Big deal. It doesn't move me. It doesn't matter to me because it's not what I prayed for. Unbelievable. What's the response of Shlomo HaMelech? Well, if I was King Solomon, I would have a whole mouthful ready. Ma had good intentions, bringing the whole world under the umbrella of God, redeeming the holy spark from the nation of Egypt. Didn't say a thing. He did say a lot, but what he did say was actually unbelievable. Ladies, the admonition that she gives to her son appears in chapter 31 of Mishlei. The first 9 psukim of chapter 31 of Mishlei is her admonition to her son. Pasuk 10 is the Eshet Chayil. In other words, Shlomo is admonished by his mother for 9 psukim, and the 10th pasuk he opens up his mouth with Eshet Chayil. And so all of Eshet Chayil essentially was written for who? For Batsheva, for his mother, because she put him in his place, and everything that she said was right on target. The way that she said it, and when she said it, and how she said it, not at all being moved by the hoopla and by the wedding and by anything. Honey, you don't have priorities straight. If you missed your tefillah for your first patient, I'm sorry, that doesn't move me. This is not the child that I prayed for. This is not what I worked for. So much so was Shlomo HaMelech moved by this admonition. Take a look at source number 7. Bekiseh Shlomo haya kiseh echad leyemino. On Shlomo's throne was another chair to the right of him, and on that chair sat not his top advisor, but his mother Batsheva. His mother Batsheva sat on that throne next to him. Unbelievable. Here's a son, right, who when he receives the admonition, takes to heart. Having introduced Batsheva like this, and having seen that this is a woman who knows her priorities, and nothing can move her, and all the things that people in the world crave after, this is not something that moves her. With this in mind, we can now explore the story of Batsheva, which raises so many eyebrows, of this Batsheva bathing on the rooftop, who King David takes for himself as a wife. Let's study the sources. Let's look at the verses, and let's try to understand what happened and why it happened. Source number 8. So now we're in Shmuel bit. Vayihi l'tshuvat hashana, so towards the end of the year, le'et tzat hamelachim, is a time when there was war. Vayishlach David et Yoav et avadav imo ve'et kol bnei Yisrael vayishchitu et bnei Ammon. So the setting basically is, there's a battle. The Jewish people are going to war against the nation of Ammon. Okay? We are destroying them. We're razing them down to the ground. Vayatzuru al Rabbah. They besiege the capital city of Ammon. Right, so most of the Jewish guys are not in Israel. Most of the Jewish guys are in battle. King David, Yoshef beYerushalayim. He's back in Israel for whatever particular reason he chose to be in Israel. Usually he would join his men in battle. For this particular battle, he was not with the men in Ammon. Okay, so here's David. The land of Israel is is in battle. Vayihi le'et ha'erev. It was evening time. Vayakam David me'al mishkavo. David got up from his bed. Vaytalech al gag beit hamelech, and he went up to his rooftop, which was not something uncommon. In fact, most of the book of Tehillim was composed late at night, when he would go up outside or to the rooftop. But this particular evening, this particular night, he was distracted by something. Vayar isha rochetzet me'al hagag. He caught a glimpse of a woman who was bathing upon her rooftop. Now, what on earth are you doing taking a shower on your rooftop? Well, if you don't have indoor plumbing, then it's a very good reason to go take a shower on your rooftop, where you probably had some kind of barrel of some sorts where you would bathe. Now, is she completely indecent? Does she have no covering over herself? You'll see in a moment. Now, P.S. Va'isha tovat mar'eh me'od. She's exceedingly beautiful and pleasant to look at. How did David HaMelech bring himself to this point where he ends up noticing this beautiful woman on the rooftop? Now, we'll see soon. Well, actually, I'll take you there now. Take a look at source number 10 real quick. Immediately after he sees her, David goes back inside, and Vayishlach David Vayidrosh Laisha. He sends out a request. Who's that woman? Who lives across the street over there? What's her name? Who is she? Why? Why? Oh, who is she? Vayomer, and they told him, you know who she is. Halozot Batsheva, you know, Batsheva. Bat Eliyam, you know who she is. Eshet Uriah HaChiti, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, you know who she is. Now I'll tell you soon how he knew exactly who she was. What on earth do you care, King David, about this woman who has nothing to do with you, who's bathing on a rooftop? What are you doing bathing on a rooftop? Yeah? I have a lot of questions. Let's take a look at source number 9, which is going to where the Gemara is going to put together all of these little details by giving us a lot of missing pieces of the puzzle. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Le'olam al yavi adam atzmo lidei nisayon. Begins the Gemara. You should never put yourself in a circumstance where you will be tempted to sin. You should never put yourself in a situation where you might stumble and be tempted. What does that have to do with anything? Sherei David melech Yisrael hevi atzmo lidei nisayon. That's exactly where King David went wrong right here. He put himself in a situation where he would be very likely to be tempted. V'nichshal, and he stumbled. Amar lefanav. See, one particular day, says the Gemara, King David had a little talk with God. Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, I got a question for you. מפני מה אומרים אלוקי אברהם, אלוקי יצחק, אלוקי יעקב, ואין אומרים אלוקי דוד? Why do we say, right, in our prayers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob? We don't say the God of David. You know, I'm the father of the monarchy. I'm the father of the Jewish kings. How come I don't get your name attached to me like that? Amar, so God answered him, Inhu minasuli. I tested them severely, and they passed. Ve'ata lo minasit li. But you, I didn't test you like I tested them. I tested the forefathers in a certain very, very difficult way, and they passed. You, I didn't test you. You didn't go through the gauntlet yet. Amar lefanav, so David said, Ribono shel olam b'chaneini uneseni. Try me. Test me. Right? It's a quote from Tehillim. B'chaneini Hashem uneseni. Amar, says God, Menaselach, okay, David, I'll test you, and I'll do you a favor. I'll give you an advantage that I didn't give the forefathers. The forefathers, I did not tell them in advance, okay, you got a test coming up. I didn't tell them how they were going to be tested. I just threw it into their lap. But you, I'm going to tell you exactly what kind of test I'm going to give you. I'm going to test you, and the nature of the test will be one of physical temptation. Okay? Get ready, get set. And so when King David was walking upon his rooftop, and he caught a glimpse of this very good-looking woman who was bathing on her rooftop. Here's a story. Here's why she was bathing. Batsheva was shampooing her hair. As we're going to see soon, she was preparing herself to go to the mikveh. She was doing her monthly preparations, even though her husband was out in battle, but nevertheless, you never know when the husband is going to come back. And so she wanted to be ready at any moment. She was shampooing her hair. And she was doing it under a canopy. So yes, of course, she was completely covered. Like today we have shower curtains, even though you lock your bathroom door, but you still have a shower curtain. She also had some kind of a canopy. The commentaries debate if it's a canopy or a cone of some sort, but basically there was something covering her. So what, she opened her canopy? No, she did no such thing. Ata Satan, the Satan. The Satan disguised himself as a bird. You know, the Satan can take all kinds of guises. He can look like this and he can look like that. So the Satan, he took the guise of a bird. Patak Begira. So here's King David, quote unquote, shooting arrows, okay, at this bird. I guess he wanted to catch the bird. And he shot an arrow towards the bird, maybe towards the bird's foot or something, so the bird would fall and then he could catch it for himself. And as King David is shooting an arrow, aiming at the bird, Pitka lechalta, the canopy pierced open. In other words, the bird was flying around the area of Batsheva's canopy where she was bathing. The arrow missed the bird, but went right through the canopy. Batsheva became exposed, not of her own free will, but because King David was shooting an arrow at the bird. And of course the bird was the guise of the Satan. Iglei v'chazei. So she became exposed, and he saw her. That's how he saw her. He wasn't intending to be a peeping Tom, God forbid. This is King David we're talking about. She wasn't being indecent by bathing on the rooftop, but this is how it came to be. Vaidrosh leisha. And so then, right, he started asking, and look at the afterthought that King David says to himself, last line in source 10, I wish I kept my mouth muzzled. I wish I didn't ask God to test me. Well, too late. Now he's in the heat of things. Source number 10. David sends and he asks, V'yishlach David v'yidrosh laisha, who is this woman? V'yomer halo zot Batsheva bat Eliam. You know who she is? She's Batsheva, the daughter of Eliam, Eshet Uriah Chiti, the wife of Uriah. How does David know Batsheva? Because he was her matchmaker. He's the one who married her off to her very husband. I'll show you the story. King David knows Batsheva very well. He was the Shatchan, he was the matchmaker between Batsheva and her current husband Uriah. Uriah HaChiti. Uriah HaChiti. Who are the Chitim? The Chitim were non-Jewish. Non-Jews. The Chitim were one of the non-Jewish nations. So the commentaries say that Uriah, he was either an Israelite, he was either a Jew who was living in the nation of the Chitim, or he was a convert. He was a Hittite, and he converted. So there's a controversy. There's one opinion that says like this, there's one opinion that says like that. In any case, Batsheva was married to him. And here is the episode in which David was the matchmaker. Take a quick look at source 11. Ksheba Goliath, remember the big battle between David and Goliath? The giant? Ksheba Goliath, when King David, little David, killed the giant Goliath, he killed him. But he needed to kind of, do the final blow of killing him all the way. In other words, the giant was fallen, but he needed to give the final hit to Goliath. Problem was, King David couldn't kill Goliath, because Goliath was wearing the special armor, the special, armor shield over his head, and David HaMelech didn't know how to open it. King David wanted to really chop, Goliath's head off, and he couldn't because he was shielded by armor. Who was standing next to him? Uriah. Amar lo Uriah, im eftach lecha titen li isha? Uriah said, I'll make you a deal. I'll open the armor of Goliath. I know how to. Uriah was a very clever man of war. He was very strong. And he said, if I open the giant's armor for you, will you find me a Jewish girl? Vayomer lo David, I'll get you a Jewish girl. Don't worry, just open the armor. Up in heaven, Amar lo Hashem, Bnot Yisrael ata mechalek? You divvying up the Jewish girls? You treating the Jewish girls like some kind of object to be distributed? This is how you treat a Jewish girl? Yeah, I'll get you a wife. You can't talk like that about Jewish girls. But not Israel ata mechalek. Right? What if he's not worthy of the person who you're going to find for him? You're dividing up a Jewish girl like she's an object? You should thank him. Get him maybe a gift certificate to Target. $150 a Target for you. What are you giving him a Jewish girl for? Okay, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he deserves somebody else. But this is not how you treat a Jewish girl. Chayecha ishtecha netuna lo. You know what? Your own wife is going to be given to him. Look at that. Batsheva was supposed to be King David's own wife. He doesn't know this, but this is what God is saying up in heaven when David says, I'll get you a Jewish girl. Hashem says, yeah, you're going to give your own wife. He Batsheva hare'iyuya le David, and this is none other than Batsheva, who is really supposed to be the wife of King David. Now we'll come back to this, but I want to show you the rest of the story. Source 12, I'm going to go fairly quickly. Vayishlach David malachim vayikachea. So King David sends messengers and he tells her to come to him. Vatavo elav vayishkav ima. And so she came to him. The king orders, you got to do what the king says. And he had relations with her. Now P.S. V'hi mitkadeshet mitumata. She had just gone to the mikvah, so to speak. She had just undone herself from her state of impurity. Remember when she was shampooing her head on the rooftop, it was in preparation to go to the mikvah. And by the time she got the command to go to the king, she had gone to the mikvah before that. So in terms of whether or not she was a woman who was still a nidah, she was not nidah because she had just come out of the mikvah. Vatashav el beita. So after she was intimate with him, she went back home. Vatahar ha'isha. She got pregnant. Vatishlach, and she sent a messenger. Vataged leDavid, vatomer hara anochi. Guess what? I got pregnant. Vayishlach David el Yoav. Now David has a problem. The battle with Ammon is going to be over soon. Maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe a year. But sooner or later, Uriah is going to come back. And he's going to find his wife pregnant. What happened? He has a problem. Now there's lots of ways that King David can go about this problem. He can stall the soldiers and battle, say, okay guys, you gotta stay there for 2 years. Right? And then, have her have the baby, okay, everything will go back and, somehow somebody else will raise the baby. There's lots of things he could do. So David puts plan A into action. What's plan A? Shlach elai et Uriah. Source 12, third line. He sends a word to his army general, send Uriah home to me. Vaishlach Yoav et Uriah al David. Yoav says, okay, Uriah, you got vacation, go home. Why? I don't know. Vayavo Uriah elav. Uriah comes to the king. Yes, king, what can I do for you? Vayishal David lishlom Yoav, lishlom ha'am, lishlom ha'milchama. How's the war going? Good. How the Jews doing there? Good. How's army general? Good, everything's good. Okay. Vayomer David leUriah. Listen, Uriah, red lebeitcha. Why don't you go home? Spend the night at home. Rechatz raglecha. Wash your feet, which is a clean way of saying, why don't you go be with your wife? Vayetze Uriah mi beit hamelech. Uriah, left the palace. Vatetze acharav mas'at hamelech. And the king's entourage went after him. Remember the entourage. I'm going to come back to it later. What does he need an entourage for? You'll see later. And what does Uriah do? Now, if I was Uriah, I haven't seen my wife in months maybe. Of course, wife, I'm home. Honey, I'm home. Oh, great. What does he do? He doesn't even text her. Nothing. Vayishkav Uriah petach beit hamelech. He sleeps on the floor of the palace. On the floor. What are you doing sleeping on the floor for? Et avdei adonav. He sleeps with the servants. V'lo yarad el beito. And he didn't step foot in his house. Now the whole point was what? That he should go home, he should be intimate with his wife. She's a week or two pregnant, and then, maybe Uriah will think that she got pregnant that night when he was sent home on vacation. But plan A was foiled. David says, okay, we're going to try this one more time. King David, Uriah didn't do as you said. So David calls Uriah in for a little cup of tea in the morning. He says, Uriah, you were just in battle. You had a long way to come back here to Israel. Why didn't you go home? Look at this Uriah. Vayomer Uriah David. Ha'aron veYisrael veYudah yoshvim besukot. The Holy Ark, which always went out to war with us. The Holy Ark and the Jewish people are sitting in army huts. Ve'adoni Yoav ve'avdei Adoni al pnei hasadeh chonim. And my master Yoav, who is he referring to? Who's the master? The army general. Don't forget that he's calling him master. And my master, my army general Yoav, he's sitting in the battlefield. V'ani avo al beiti. And you want me to go to my house, le'echol ve'lishtot, have a nice dinner, have some wine, ve'lishkav im ishti, and to be intimate with my wife? Chayecha, I swear, v'chayei nafshecha, I swear on your head, im eset hadavar hazeh, I would never do such a thing. Psh, a man with dignity, a man with integrity. His fellow brethren are out there in battle and he's going to go be with his wife. No way, I would never do that. They're suffering, they're out there in battle, and I'm going to kick up my legs and take a bath. What are you talking about? Vayomer David el Uriah. So David says, okay, Uriah, relax. Shev bezeh, gam hayom. Why don't you hang out in my house a little bit? Umachar shlachecha, and tomorrow I'll send you back to battle, which is apparently where you want to be. Vayeshev Uriah b'Yerushalayim b'yom hahu mimacharat. So Uriah stays for 24 more hours. ויקרא לו דוד ויאכל לפניו וישכרהו. David makes a big dinner for him that night, and of course part of dinner is a big bottle of wine. And he gets Uriah drunk. For the go to your wife, okay? Gotta get you to be with your wife. And even in a state of drunkenness, ויצא בערב לשכב במשכבו עם עבדי אדוניו, ואל ביתו לא ירד. Uriah goes to sleep outside on the floor with the servants and did not go to his house. David says, okay, if plan A is not going to work, we're going to put plan B into action. What's plan B? ויהי בבוקר ויכתוב דוד ספר. David writes, not an email, he writes a hard copy. He writes a letter to the army general Yoav vayishlach bayad Uriah. And he puts it in Uriah's hand and he says, you give this to your army general. And what does it say in this letter that Uriah is transporting back to battle? ויכתוב בספר לאמור, הבו את אוריה אל מול פני המלחמה החזקה. Put Uriah on the front line of the battle. Okay, where the shooting is real hard. Put him on the front line. ושפטם מאחוריו. Then retreat a little bit so he'll be really, really vulnerable. וניקב המת. And hopefully, he'll get hurt in battle. In other words, right, let the battle go on. Put Uriah in the heat of the battle, right in the front lines. Retreat a little bit so he'll be exposed. And then maybe he'll die. This is the instructions of the king. And this is what Uriah is carrying in his hand. Right? ויבשמור יואב את העיר, ויתן את אוריה למקום אשר ידע כי אנשי חיל שם. So the army general does just exactly that. He takes Uriah and he puts him in the front lines where he knows the battle is really, really difficult there. And last pasuk, ויצאו אנשי העיר וילחמו את יואב, ויפול מן העם מעבדי דוד, וימת גם אוריה החיתי. And indeed, the battle continued, and lots of people died, and among them was Yoav. Well, what happens with David? What happens with Batsheva? They didn't live happily ever after. In fact, the baby that Batsheva got pregnant with died within a week of having been born. Okay, so they don't live happily ever after. Now, our question is going to be, how can you do this? Right? How can you do this? You're king of Israel. Right? You're the father of King Solomon who ends up building the Beit HaMikdash. You wrote the book of Tehillim. How can you kind of fall so low? There's lots of other things that you could have done, right? You could have, stalled, right? You could have stalled and you could have had Batsheva had the baby. Why did you have to put plan B into action like this? And aside from that, why did you succumb to temptation in such a fashion and take Batsheva? These are things that, people see things and people have self-restraint. Why didn't you exercise self-restraint? It's a very, very, very bothersome story. Now, what we're going to see as we're going to look at the sources is that the commentaries kind of divide. There's one side that says, yeah, he messed up big time. He really did. Really messed up big time. And the other side says, what are you talking about? He didn't do anything wrong. He's free of sin 100%. We're going to study both sides, and we're going to see what our conclusion is going to be. And that's going to be our major point of study. The place that I want to start is a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat in source number 13. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan. This is our starting point. This is not taking sides. This is a starting point. Kol ha'omer David chata eino ela to'eh. Whoever says that King David sinned, sorry, you're wrong. That's our starting point. This is not taking sides. This is the premise. If you think that King David did a mistake, you're wrong. You're mistaken. Now, Chazal say this about a lot of people. Chazal say this about King Solomon, who married the daughter of Paro. If you think he did something wrong, well, guess what? You're wrong. Chazal say this about a lot of people, which is basically a way of saying you can't take what he did at face value. That's what it means. You got to look deeper. There's something between the lines, and you got to look for what's between the lines. Whenever Chazal say about somebody, whoever says that he sinned, guess what? You're wrong. When they say this, it means you can't take the story at face value. If Hollywood were to make a movie of this, you can just imagine what they would do. Taking the story at face value, you can't take it at face value. There's something beneath that you have to understand. Okay? That's our starting point. Let's take a look now. Source 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 14 through 19, and all these sources are all from the same place, from the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, and they're all going to find a way through the verses to show he did nothing wrong technically. Whatever he did was 100% kosher. This is what the Gemara is going to try to prove. Let's start off with source 14. Ready for this one? ראויה הייתה בת-שבע בת אליעם לדוד מששת ימי בראשית. Batsheva was predestined for David since the 6 days of creation. She's the other half of a soul. She's a soulmate. And we already saw something like this, right, in the story of David and Goliath, when Hashem said, you're giving up your own wife. Batsheva, the daughter of Eliam, was befitting for David, and she was predestined to be his wife since the 6 days of creation. Ella, it's just that, now I put a ... I'm not going to tell you what it says in that ... because we're not ready for it, but we'll be ready for it soon. V'chentana de Rabbi Ishmael, and another rabbi in the Gemara says the same thing. Ru'uya ita David leBatsheva, Bat Eliam. David and Batsheva were soulmates. So what's the problem? Ella, but the only thing is, and then I put ... and this ... I'll tell you soon what's in the ... We're not ready for it yet, but it's very important. Everything depends on that ... but we're not ready for it. Source 15. Says the Gemara, what do you mean King David did a sin? He didn't sin. After all, doesn't it say, Vayehi David l'chol drachav maskil v'Hashem imo? Whatever path King David went on, God was with him. Well, doesn't that seem to indicate that if God was with him, that, God was with him. God was happy with King David. If shachet ba le'yodo v'shchina imo, you want to tell me God was with him even though he did something wrong? It must be that David didn't do anything wrong. Otherwise, what? Why would God be with him? You convinced? You convinced? Maybe? Not so much. Okay, maybe source number 15 will convince you that he didn't do anything wrong. 16. Pasuk says, Et Uriah HaChiti hikita b'cherev. You smote Uriah with a sword. You had him smitten by sword. Et Uriah HaChiti hikita b'cherev. So says the Gemara, the Uriah, you had him smitten with a sword. And the only technical problem was, "Shehaya lecha leduno b'sanhedrin velo danta." You should have first given him a trial. And then you could have killed him. So technically, says the Gemara, technically Uriah was deserving of death. Technically he was deserving of death. But David didn't put him to trial. David, being the king, the chief legislator, right, took the situation in his own hands. You're right, it's true that he was deserving of death, but you should have put him to trial. Why was Uriah deserving of death? Take a look at source 19. Take a look at source 19. Uriah was deserving of death, 19th second line, Maitama, Mored b'malchut haya. He had the status of someone who rebelled against the king. Uriah rebelled against the king? He was a man of such integrity. When did he rebel against the king? Do you remember? Do you remember when King David said, why didn't you go to your wife? Why didn't you go home? And how did Uriah respond? My master Yoav is in battle, and I'm going to go with my wife? In front of the king, you're calling somebody else master. This is technically a problem. Furthermore, there's another source which I don't have over here. It says that when Uriah did not heed to the command of the king to go be with his wife, he rebelled against the king. When the king tells you to do something, you gotta do it. The king says, go home, go to your wife. You didn't do it. Death penalty. It's a big problem. So technically speaking, Uriah was mored b'malchuti, right, rebelled against the king. So technically speaking, right, he forfeited his life. Only technical difficulty with King David is that he didn't put it to trial, right, in the high court. He took the situation in his own hands. You convinced? Not so much. Take a look at source number 17. The verse says, Et ishto lakachta lecha leisha. You took his wife for yourself as a wife. Okay? Now the word for you took, what's the word in source 17? We're getting real technical here. The word for you took his wife for yourself as a wife. What's the word for you took? Lakachta. Okay? Lakachat means to take. Ani lokachat kos, ani lokachat tissue, ani lokachat recorder. Lakachat means to take. Lakachat is also a technical word which means to marry. Okay? Lakachat also means to marry. Now, if I, God forbid, say, I'm going to marry this cup, okay, the word lakachat, it doesn't go, right? Right? Because there's no concept of marrying a cup. If I, God forbid, say, right, I'm going to marry a dog, ani lokachat kelev, well, you could say it, but technically, your marriage is not binding. If you take a woman who's already married, okay, for yourself, the word that's going to be used is not lakachat, it's going to be rape. But if the pasuk says that you took her for a wife, that means what? It means your marriage was valid. You with me? It's very technical. It means your marriage was valid because the word lakachat means to marry. And the verse is using this word as a technical term, meaning the concept of marriage applied here. Right? Unlike if you take a dog, the concept of marriage doesn't apply. It doesn't take water. If you take a cup, you can't marry a cup. So the verse is not going to say lakachat. But lakachat is a technical term. Likuchin yeshba. She was marriageable. And here's the clincher in source number 18. This is the strongest argument. The Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Abba Rabbi Yonatan. The rule was, if you were a soldier, in the days of King David, Kol hayotze lemilchemet Beit David kotev get kritut leishto. If you were a soldier in the army of King David, before you went out to battle, you gave your wife a divorce document. Okay? And then it goes on to prove how this is so. So Uriah, why is this so? Is to protect the wife, just in case, God forbid, the husband becomes missing in action. Technically, she cannot marry somebody else because she doesn't know if her husband is, God forbid, dead or alive. He's MIA. So they used to give divorce documents to their wives. Now, these divorce documents were either conditional or non-conditional. How so? If they were non-conditional, it means, here's your divorce papers, honey, when I get back, we'll get married, okay? Right. That means unconditional. We're divorced from today on. When we come back, we'll have another party. You can buy yourself a new dress. If it's conditional, it means like this. In case I become missing in action, only in that case, this divorce will take effect retroactively. Okay? So if I'm not missing in action, if I come home, we don't have to get married again, because we're married. In case I become missing in action, then from this second on, we are divorced. Okay? Now, whether or not what Uriah gave Batsheva was conditional or unconditional, it doesn't matter, because in any case, once Uriah is dead, right, the divorce took place the second he gave her the get. So according to this, according to source 18, she's no longer married to Uriah. She's a free woman. A. B. She's not nida either. She just came out of the mikveh. C. Uriah has a death penalty on his head because he's mored b'malchut. Is his union kosher? You're not nodding. Something you still don't like it. Right? It still doesn't sit. You're right. It still doesn't sit. Of Batsheva, technically is one glatt kosher, 100% kosher. Technically, so far, Mrs. Goldmeyer still says I don't buy it. Neither do some others. Take a look at source number 20. All these seeming ways to try to get King David off the hook, says the Gemara Amarav. You know who made up all these excuses? Who made up all these excuses? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the Ati David, who came from King David, is trying to make hoops in the air to try to get his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather off the hook. So says the Gemara, you got to keep in mind who's making up all these excuses. It's Rabbi Yehuda the prince, right, who was a descendant of King David, and he's trying to, find some kind of loophole, right, to show that his great-great-great-grandfather didn't do anything wrong. Now, technically, all these things are correct. That's on one side. On the other hand, there's a commentator called the Abarbanel in source 22 who points out to us, King David spent years repenting over this episode with Batsheva. In fact, there's a whole chapter in Tehillim which is dedicated to his asking God for forgiveness. It's chapter 51 in Psalms, chapter 51 in Tehillim. I've just put the first 6 psukim in source 21. When the prophet came to admonish King David for having had relations with Batsheva, and King David says, please erase my sin. Who's saying this? King David himself. He's calling himself a sinner. Launder my sins away. Please purify me from my sin. This is King David himself. This is him talking about himself. I know I messed up. I know my sins. My sin is always in front of me. I wake up in the morning, I have my breakfast, I have my lunch, I go to sleep at night. The only thing I see is my sin. I did that which was evil in your eyes. And the parent goes on and on and on. It's chapter 51 in Tehillim. So here's somebody who spends years doing tshuva, who composes a whole parak of Tehillim, admitting to something that he did wrong. And anytime anything ever went wrong in King David's life, he always says it happened because of what I did with Batsheva. Well, says the Abarbanel in source 22, Sof davar im hakatuv k'ro choteh, if the pasuk calls him a sinner, v'hu hodach eto, and if he himself calls himself a sinner, would you fault me in believing that maybe he did something wrong? So says the Abarbanel, Tov li she'omar shechata me'od vehoda me'od. Says the Abarbanel, I would like to conclude that he messed up big time and that he did repentance big time. V'shav b'tshuva shlema v'kibel onsho. He did complete teshuvah and he accepted his punishment. That's the Abarbanel. Yeah, he really sinned. This was not kosher. And then he repented and he accepted his punishment. Comes along the Malbim, source 23, and says, what are you talking about? How can you say that David HaMelech sinned? Im hayta eshet ish. Now you understand, if we're going to point a finger at him and say that he sinned, what are we accusing him of? We're accusing him of having committed adultery. It's one thing when you steal $10 from the bank, all right? It's quite another thing when you commit adultery and murder. Right? Im hayta eshet ish, ech lekacha achar kach leisha. Says the Malbim, it's impossible that he took a married woman. Why? Because what happened after Uriah died, he married her. He married her, and the rule is, a woman who has an affair, she cannot go back to her husband, halachically, and she cannot go back to the man who she had an affair with. That's the law. She cannot go back to the man who she was married to, rightfully, and she cannot go back to the one who she had an affair with. So King David knows this rule. I mean, this is basics. right? So if he took her, right, if she did what she did with him and really she wasn't allowed to, then he wasn't allowed to marry her. So don't tell me he committed adultery. How could God have ever accepted his repentance? The woman who he sinned with is his own wife. It's like he didn't let go of his sin. It's like going to the mikvah and holding onto a cockroach. You gotta let go of the cockroach, but he's not letting go of her. She's not allowed to be with you. She's not allowed to be with you. Right? She committed adultery. She's not allowed to be with you. So says the Malbim, don't tell me he committed adultery. Don't tell me he did something as terrible as this, because his tshuva would never have been accepted, because he married her. God would never have allowed for that. And you want to tell me then that Hashem chose her son to be king? How would God have chosen her son to be king and called him Yedidia, right? The friend of God, and God loved him no less. Hashem would never have accepted her child as king. She was married to him illicitly. Therefore, says the Malbim, P.S. King Solomon's nickname that God himself gave him was Yedidia, the friend of God. That is the name that God gave King Solomon. Says the Malbim, don't tell me that King David did all these things wrong. Don't tell me that he committed adultery. It's not possible, because otherwise God would never have accepted his repentance, because she's still there with him. He's not letting go of the sin. And look at that, right? His son became God's beloved one. It would never have been so. So what's the problem? So here we're going to get to a very, very, very fine point. And this is the point that in source 13 I put a ... and I told you we're not, which source was it in that I put ... source 14. And I told you we're not ready for it. We're ready for it now. How are we going to kind of reconcile these two different schools of thought? Batsheva did something wrong, Batsheva didn't do anything wrong, David is free of sin, everything was technically kosher, maybe it wasn't so kosher. How do we put all this together? Take a look at source 24. ראויה הייתה בתשבה בת אליעם לדוד מששת ימי בראשית. Yes, Batsheva was worthy. Batsheva was predestined to be King David's wife since the 6 days of creation. Ela. Only thing is, שבא עליה במכאוב. He took her in a scandalous way. וכן תנא דבר רבי ישמעאל, ראויה הייתה דוד לבת-שבע בת אליעם. Yes, David was predestined to marry Batsheva. אלא שאכלה פגה. He ate her, he took her when she was unripe. When a fruit is unripe, it's called pag. A fruit is raw, right? A fruit is growing and it's green, it's not ready. It needs 6 more months on the tree. It needs 4 more months on the tree. He took her when the timing wasn't right. She's yours. She's yours. She's predestined to be yours since the 6 days of creation. She was supposed to be yours forever. Only thing is, there's only one problem, and that is the timing is wrong. She's not ripe. She is raw. The timing is not right yet. When the time will be right, it's going to be perfect. Now the time is not right. You know something? The Gemara tells us that usually, when is the decree in heaven issued, who is going to be whose soulmate? 40 days before the formation of a fetus. 40 days before the formation of a fetus. In other words, when the child is conceived up in heaven, Bat Kol, there's a heavenly voice which decrees, Ben Ploni le Ploni, Bat Ploni le Ploni. The daughter of so-and-so is going to marry the son of so-and-so. This is decreed at the moment of conception. And it's also decreed, Sadeh Ploni le Ploni, where you're going to live. Lots of things are decreed. This is decreed at the moment of conception. You know, interestingly, David and Batsheva, this couple, was not decreed at the moment of conception. It was decreed when? At the 6 days of creation. Why does Hashem have to make this announcement at the 6 days of creation? Who's listening? The angels? Right? David is predestined to marry Batsheva. What does it have to do with the 6 days of creation? You know, he's doing big stuff. He's creating heaven, earth, the waters, the land. What is he talking about David and Batsheva? Who cares? You know why it's so important? It's so important because from David and Batsheva, it has to be predestined at the beginning of creation. Why? Because what comes from David and Batsheva? Mashiach. that's right. King Solomon was is the progeny from whom the Messiah is going to come from. So at the moment of creation, David and Batsheva were predestined to be together because this is the seed of redemption. This is the door which opens up the eventual redemption. Through David and Batsheva, the whole universe is going to come full circle. David and Batsheva being married, the whole world depends on it. The universe cannot come to a full circle without David and Batsheva getting married. They got to get married. It's part of the blueprint of creation. It's not just it's not just a nice wedding. They must be married. If they don't get married, there's no Mashiach, there's no redemption. The whole world cannot come to perfection. So their union is it's top priority in heaven. It was decreed during the 6 days of creation. So what's the problem? One problem: timing wasn't right. Timing wasn't right. Says the Zohar in source 25. אם ראויה הייתה בת שבע לדוד מששת ימי בראשית, למה נתנה מוקדם לאוריה החיתי? Look, if Batsheva was really supposed to be for King David, so why did she go ahead and marry Uriah? Why did God let that happen? אלא, says the Zohar, כך דרכו של השם. This is the way of God. אפילו כשמזומנת לאדם אישה, even when a man has a woman that is predestined for him, אם לא הגיע עוד זמנה, if the time for this union is not yet there, הוא מקדים אחרת ונותן לו עד שיגיע זמנה שזאת. Then he'll give somebody else the opportunity to marry this person. But when the time comes for these two particular people to get married, נדחית זאת שנשא אותה מפני האחרת. Then whoever else is in the way will get pushed away. Right, and whatever God's divine plan is, right, and the Zohar doesn't go into a lot of detail here, in other places it does, and whatever union is supposed to happen is going to happen. It was going to happen. Only problem is timing. Now take a look at the last source, Shem u'Neshama. Matzav ze, this situation of Batsheva being eaten unripe, raw, maskir lanu et chet Adam harishon, is not so different from the underlying problem of Adam in the Garden of Eden. שלא המתין לליל שבת לרגע ההיתר. Apparently, Adam was supposed to wait to be intimate with Chava until, when was Adam created? Day number 6, Friday. He was supposed to be intimate with Chava Friday night. A few more hours. He was created towards the end of Friday. First the animals were created. Towards the end of the day, towards the latter part of the day rather, Adam and Chava were created. At night is when they were supposed to be intimate. That would be the permissible moment. Ve'achala paga, but he ate her when she was raw. He ate her. We're talking about minutes. We're talking about moments of a difference. The timing wasn't right. Ve'ken chet'o shel David HaMelech. The same problem with King David. Shahayta mezumenet lo Batsheva misheshet yimei bereshit. Batsheva was on the blueprint of creation that she must marry King David. Ela she'achala paga, but he ate her when she was raw. P.S. They both knew it. They both knew it. He knew it. He's King David. He has prophecy. She knew it too. She's Batsheva. She's not a simple woman. We saw, this is a woman who has her priorities straight. This is a woman who on the grand opening of the Beit HaMikdash, the morning after her son's wedding, can whack him with a sandal, tie him to a pole and put him in his place. This is not what I prayed for. I don't care about your royalty. So don't tell me Batsheva was all excited that instead of being married to a little soldier, she's going to be married to a king. No, this is a woman who has her priorities straight. Right? And she knew it too, that she felt it in the depths of her soul. She knows she must be with David. David knows that he must be with Batsheva. So they hear their souls talking. L'umat zot, on the other hand, take a look at another couple. Take a look at another couple who didn't make this mistake. מוצאים אנו מנגד את התיקון הנפלא של זיווג בועז ורות. Remember Ruth and Boaz in the field? Right? Here's Ruth, 40 years old, right? Here's Boaz, 80 years old. Ruth was the first woman in our Woman of Valor lecture series who we discussed. And she goes into the field late at night. She lays down near his feet. It's a very, very romantic evening over there. And she's not married. Technically, she's allowed to be with Boaz. And in fact, she thinks that technically he is the rightful person who is supposed to marry her. And he even asks her, who are you? In other words, you're married, you're not married, like is something going to happen tonight? What's going on? Technically, he could have taken her. Everything was 100% kosher. But they did not unite until hitgabrut atzuma, a tremendous amount of self-restraint, a tremendous amount of holding back, shelo lehikashel bepsizut, so as not to stumble in hastiness. Mishum shesham ba shoresh shel melech HaMoshiach ben David. And it is from this union, which didn't happen. It happened 24 hours later. It happened a few days later. They did get married, but not that night in the field when they could have. But Boaz had to, remember he said, I got to check. I think maybe there's somebody who's first in line to marry you, right, for the levirate marriage, to take after the name of her deceased husband. I got to check this technicality out, and then we'll do it. Then, right, if nobody else can marry, then I'll marry you. So this waiting for the right moment, right, that is the seed. That is the seed. That is the door through which the Messiah emerges. This is the way that the redemption will come. Sometimes something that looks so easy, so obvious, it's a no-brainer. I'm supposed to have him, he's supposed to have me, it's predestined, yalla, everything can already. It looks so easy and obviously. You can find so many leniencies, so many, it's permissible, it's okay, it's fine, it's right, it's kosher. Just like Ruth and Boaz, they could have found 100 ways for their union in the field that night to be okay. And that moment, היה כל כך גורלי ומשמעל משמעות. It was such a significant moment. It was such a fatal moment. They don't know it. There's no music playing in the field for them to know that this is such a fatal moment. But it's such a moment pregnant with meaning, because the Mashiach is going to come from this union. But wait, not tonight. But right, and Boaz, it wasn't easy for him to keep his hands off her. The Midrash says that all night long he stuck his face in the ground and he says, Master of the world, I'm not going to touch her because I don't want to desecrate your name. Yeah? So from this waiting, shekol ha'olam talui ve'omed bo, this moment that the whole universe is waiting for, this moment of union of Ruth and Boaz. And you might fool yourself to think that everything is okay, it's okay, it's permissible, but it's not. Lekol zaman ve'et lekol chefetz. Everything has the right time. These are the words of King Solomon himself. Ve'et lekol chefetz. There's a right time, right, for everything. Kocho ha'meyuchat shel hasatan. The Satan, the evil inclination, has a special trick up his sleeve. He has a special trick that he uses. Hu lehatot bepzizut, is to make you stumble with hastiness, with impulsivity. Looks good, feels right. Rega. It looks good, it feels right, but don't be too quick, don't be too hasty, don't be too impulsive. But everything is kosher. Wait, yeah? L'hat'ot bepzizut, to make you stumble with impulsivity, with hastiness. Beprat b'davar sheshayach la'adam v'ra'ui lo, especially when it comes to something which is rightfully yours, and which you are deserving of, and which really does belong to you. And you want it now, and you want it. This is the way of the Satan. Ela she'adayin lo higia hazman hamatim. The only thing that's missing is that the timing has to be right. And when it comes to the divine scheme of things, is not just that it has to be kosher and that it has to be technically okay. The timing has to fit also. Oto ma'aseh atzmo, the action in and of itself, im haya oseu adam bizman hanachon, had you done it at the right time, at the right circumstance, in kadosh v'tahor mimeno, there would be nothing more pure and more holy than this act. Aval kshememaher, but when you do it too quick, too hasty, too impulsive, ve'oseu kodem zmano, and you do it before the right time, it's like eating your matzah, okay, before Pesach. Wait, 2 more hours, right? And it's going to be a big mitzvah to chew that matzah. But now you're not allowed to do it. It's the same who kebal arusato beveit chami. It's like having relations with your bride, right, in her father's house before you marry her. Wait till the wedding. 2 more hours, 3 more hours. She's going to be yours, kosher, everything 100%. But she's mine already. I'm going to marry her. Don't be impulsive. Don't be hasty. Last two lines. How much pain, how much damage could have been withheld from the world for that split second of time. Had Adam waited. It's a matter of moments, it's a matter of a split second. And so much damage could have been prevented. We're still paying the price. We're still rectifying that sin. And that split second, remember when Moses was late in coming? At least they thought he was late. 40 days are up. How come Moses isn't here yet? Right? And then the golden calf, for which we're still paying the price today. We're talking a matter of moments. Had you waited a moment longer, ואם היה דוד המלך ממתין בסבלנות לבת שבע. Same with David. Had he waited patiently for Batsheva, right, to be not only the right one, which she was, but to have the right time, right, then the picture would have played itself out differently, and it not only would have been the right thing, but it would have also been the right time. וכן מעשים דומים להם. And this is true in many other situations. I bless you, you should bless me, that we should do the right thing, and we should ask Hashem to help us understand when the right time for that right thing is.